Hello everybody, welcome to my mountain tutorial for VoxelSniper. So to start off building my mountains, I'm going to mark them all out with my cube brush. For this you can use any shape you want if you like spheres, cylinders, whatever you like. I just use the cubes to better visualize my mountains because this is what I'm going to be sculpting off, so it's important that I get the shape right. At first I'm using a cube size of 8 just to quickly get them laid out, and then I switched to a cube size of 5. And that'll help me get in some of the finer details, like where I want my valleys, my ridges, kind of get a general idea of where I think I'm going to want these things. So, because I'm doing 3 mountains here, it's also very important for me to get the positioning correct, so that's another good reason to mark it out like this initially. You also just generally need a base to be building off of with your erode brushes, so definitely don't forget this very important step in your mountain building. So once I have my mountains all where I want them, I'm going to be starting to use my erode brushes on them. So for this, I set my arrow to be BE lift, and my gunpowder by default then is on melt, and then I don't have to type any more commands. I can easily just alternate between my gunpowder and my arrow to kind of mold these mountains the way I want them. Now obviously I don't want my mountains to look super cubey. This is Minecraft, but we don't want this big of cubes. Smaller cubes, please. So we're going to turn our mountains into more of a cone shape because these are fantasy mountains. We're definitely going to be focusing on exaggerating that really sharp cone shape going up. And yeah, I really like the look of fantasy mountains, so I tend to do those the most. Obviously, once we have all of our cone shapes in, then we can focus on some of the more detailed ridges and valleys and stuff. But you can kind of see even in the original cone shape where I maybe plan on putting some ridges or valleys in this. Definitely see as I'm going, I'm thinking about those types of things. Alright, once I have all of my cone shapes in place, I do a general smoothing, and then I go back in and I really exaggerate these ridges and valleys that I want here, shaping up the top of the mountain. And I do these ridges to about halfway up the mountain, and then I go for more of a steeper cliff going up there. That's just my strategy. Obviously, you can shape your mountains however you want. These are just the techniques that I use to do it personally. Just a lot of smoothing, melting, getting these exaggerated ridges in place, and building this actually only took me about an hour, so it's really not a long building process. Once I'm happy with what I have, I use my blend ball brush, and I use a very big brush size for this, a 9 to 11 brush size. I just click a few times. I don't want it to be too staircasey. I want it to look a little bit rough and ragged. So I click around with this, and if I'm not happy with it, I mold a couple of other things with the erode brushes, and then eventually I settle on something that I am happy with. So here is the general shape of our mountains. Obviously I didn't spend a ton of time on this, but I'm fairly happy with the shape that they have. So now we're going to focus on getting them colored, because obviously we don't want them to be a plain gray. So I get kind of a color palette laid out here, and I take my darkest color. I'm going to do shading now. So in the darkest parts of my mountain, so down in those deep valley crevices, I'm going to be putting my darkest color, and that is the dark gray concrete. Just laying that in all of those darkest corners to really get a lot of nice shading on the go here. And then once that's all in place, it obviously looks a little bit funny right now, but once we get the rest of the color gradient in, it really looks really good and accentuates those curves in the mountains. Alright, now that all my concrete is in place, I'm going to be doing the gray terracotta and just going over that. Obviously this is a much lighter color, so I can exaggerate that a little bit further up the mountainside, go a little bit further out of those valleys there. Really just adding quite a lot of this color. I'm using a larger brush size for this obviously as well, so that I can really envelop that concrete really well. I don't want to have a spot where it's just concrete and none of the clay. It really needs to be balanced out quite good, and you need that gradient because the concrete is far darker than the next shade in the gradient that we are going to use. And the next shade in the gradient we are going to use is actually the light gray concrete. And I really like the way that the concrete looks in this just because of the colors. The light gray concrete almost brings in some of those warmer yellow tones. And for my mountain colors, I'm going to be going with some warmer tones despite them having kind of a cold top. You could do wintry mountains if you wanted to, but I tend to go for those warmer, summerier colors with my mountains. Also, if you guys are looking for a lot more texture in your mountains, I definitely don't recommend going for the concretes. Although the colors in the concretes are amazing, they don't have a ton of texture. So you could definitely go for something like acacia wood or andesite. Other things like that would also look very, very nice in these mountains. You have a lot of gray and brown blocks to choose from. So definitely take some time and really look at your palette and figure out what works for your build. So now I'm going to be switching to my cylinder brush for this, and I'm going to be highlighting now. So all of the tops of those ridges where the sun is going to be hitting the very brightest, I'm going to be using this raw clay on it. Really highlighting all of these areas, making sure they are popping out quite a bit. And I love the way that the mountains look in this stage with all the highlights and shading kind of in place, but no real color yet. Once I am done with my cylinder brush and I've got my ridges highlighted, I'm then going to use a splatter ball to bring that color up into the top of the mountains as well, because it is kind of a cold color. So I'm wanting to bring that up into the top where my snow caps are going to be. Just helps a lot of blending between the ridges and the tops of the mountain. Once I've got all my shading in place, I can then start on my grass. Obviously, if you're going for a more barren landscape, you don't want to add grass. You can maybe add snow or something like that. But I'm going to be adding grass going part way up the mountain. I'm using a smaller brush for this than I used on my clay, but I'm just replacing some of the tops of that clay part way up with grass. The clay is obviously still there, highlighting the sides really I really like the way that the clay kind of accents the grass in this. And obviously the grass doesn't make it all the way up, so the clay is still able to really fade up into those mountaintops. And it looks a lot better once I switch my stone ground out to grass, of course. It's a very necessary step. There we go. Alright, what mountain would be complete without a snowy cap? So here we're using our splatter ball, kind of a larger size, and I'm just replacing some of that clay and stone on top there with a nice snowy cap on each of my little mountain peaks here. So despite them being summery, I've still got a little bit of snow on the top there that's left over from the winters. Alright, now as my last step here, I'm going to be shading the grass a little bit with some dark green terracotta here. So just on the edges of my grass, adding in some of that color there, just accentuates the grass a little bit more, adds a little bit more detail. Obviously, if I was going to continue terraforming this, I would add in trees, shrubbery, other grass, water, different things like that to really add a lot of details to this mountain. But because we're focusing on the pure mountain terraforming in this video, I'm not going to be doing any of that. Alright, this is our mountains. They are officially complete. Obviously, I am not a professional terraformer, but this is how I build my mountains. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye!